Hey YouTube, Ethan here. Today I want to talk about steel production and oxygen not included. But more specifically, I want to focus on your metal refinery placement and oxygen not included at various stages of your playthrough, whether that's early game, mid game, or late game. I want to show you different variations of builds that you can use with the metal refinery in order to start producing steel very early on in your playthrough, and how you can transition that production into your mid game and late game stages of your gameplay. Steel production is going to be very important for you, especially when it comes to cooling. Having an aqua tuner made out of steel is going to be essential, and this is a bottleneck that many players reach, where steel production just becomes too difficult because of the amount of heat that you're all of a sudden dealing with that were not prevalent in the early game. The game doesn't do the best job at explaining how you can deal with these massive heat fluctuations, especially when you're dealing with something like steel production in the metal refinery. So I want to show you how you can handle all of the heat, no matter what stage you are in your playthrough. Now, of course, there's going to be limitations as to how fast you can rush steel production because it's going to depend on a variety of factors. One of those is going to be getting the ingredients to steel itself. First of all, you're going to need refined iron, which you can get via the rock crusher, but you can also get it via the metal refinery once you have it set up. For refined carbon, you're going to need to use the kilns. And this is as simple as having coal or wood available, which you then feed into your kilns, and the process completes by itself. And of course, the very last thing is going to be lime. You're going to need 10 kilograms of lime per steel that you make, and this is also fairly easy to obtain because you're going to get most of your early game lime through eggshells. Now, if you already have a hatch farm set up, or a Draco farm, or any other farm for that matter, early on in your playthrough, you're going to have plenty of eggshells available for you, so you can start your steel production early. However, until your farm is mature and you have maybe multiple farms set up of the same species, you're not going to have the lime capacity available to you in order to build all of the infrastructure that you need to out of steel. So eventually, you're going to have to include materials like fossils, which can also be made into lime via the rock crusher. And of course, in order to get the metal refinery in the first place on the tech tree, you're going to need to research it. And this is also fairly simple. It's fairly early on in your skill tree that you unlock it, but you're going to need a supercomputer in order to do so. The last major requirement for the refinery is the amount of power that it needs. Each refinery needs 1200 watts of power to function. This means that you cannot use your starting wires, which are limited to just 1000 watts. You'll need conductive wires or the heavy watt wires instead. So in a situation like this, you'd want to have it as close to your power sources as possible, so you don't have to use a lot of conductive wire, but this is sometimes not practical. However, in the early game, you are going to have plenty of unrefined metals available. You're inevitably going to have things like copper and gold and iron available, which you can then make into heavy watt wires. If you do this method, just be sure that it's not connected to your regular wire directly, because in this case, the overload capacity will still be 1000 watts because a portion of that circuit is still connected to the regular wires. So you're going to need a transformer or tap off an individual power source with the heavy watt wire if that is all you're using to run your metal refinery. So now that we've gone over an overview of the basics, let's go into some of the more deeper details on how to set this thing up so it runs efficiently and effectively within your base. As usual with all of my videos, they're timestamped in the description below. You can also skip to the part that you wish to see using the YouTube time bar. So feel free to skip around the video and watch the sections on the information that you need the most. And thank you for watching. This first setup for the metal refinery is going to be the absolute most basic and most viable solution that you can use for your colony. The limiting factor to how long you can run this is how hot this pool of water gets below. And inevitably, anyone who's played an oxygen not included for multiple hours is going to have a pool of water like this somewhere on their asteroid. In this case, it happens to be a sandbox asteroid, so I don't have a lot left because I've cleared it out on sandbox mode. But sure enough, if you're digging out your entire asteroid with your duplicants, you're going to have a pool of water like this somewhere on your asteroid. And it doesn't have to be polluted water, but it's definitely going to work a lot better than regular water. And we'll go over that later in the video when we talk about what the metal refinery does to the liquids that you're going to be using as the coolant. There are some insane temperature changes, so you want to stick around and make sure you get all of that information so that you can make the best choice on which coolants you want to use in your colony. Let's take a look at some overlays and see what's happening. This metal refinery is fed by a heavy watt conductive wire and from a transformer. The transit access tube is just for my duplicants to help get in and out a lot quicker in order to show this tutorial off. The heart of this metal refinery setup is this little liquid pump here that is sucking up 30-degree polluted water from the left side of this water storage tank. The water here gets sucked up and put into a liquid reservoir, which then goes into the metal refinery. The liquid reservoir simply acts as a buffer in case there's a shortfall in pumping production, or if you want to shut the pump off for whatever reason. It's definitely not required, but I like to have buffers throughout my processes wherever I can because it makes me less susceptible to failures. Regardless, the most important is this liquid pump at this end. The second important thing that is happening here is that the output pipe from the metal refinery is going into the far right end of this water storage area. And this is important because the water that's coming out from here is going to be a lot hotter than the water that is going in. You can see the water is 30 degrees Celsius on the way into the metal refinery, and on the way out, it's 86 degrees Celsius. This is quite a substantial difference, and the reason why we're throwing this water overboard to the far right on the opposite side of the liquid pump is because the water is eventually going to heat up this pond over time. As you can see, it's already 40 degrees Celsius on this side, but it's still maintaining its 30 degrees Celsius on the left side. Now, obviously, the heat transfer is going to be a lot more dramatic and a lot more quick depending on how often you run the metal refinery. So if you're going to use a method like this, it's advised that you still ration the metal production from the metal refinery, otherwise you're going to heat up this water very quickly and it will no longer be viable to use as coolant. The longer that you can let the water sit without heating it up from the metal refinery usage, the more that it's going to cool down from the already existing cold water on the left and the general ambient temperatures of whatever material is surrounding it. But eventually, the heat will overtake this pond, and then it will no longer be viable to use. The viability of your pond is very easy to figure out. All you have to do is click on the water source, and you look at the evaporation temperature of your liquid. For the polluted water, that's 119.4 degrees Celsius. So from this point, we need to do some simple math. The water coming out of the metal refinery is 86 degrees Celsius, and the water going in is 30 degrees Celsius. This is a difference of 56 degrees Celsius that the metal refinery is adding to the polluted water. So now if we take the evaporation temperature of the polluted water, which is 119, and minus the temperature that the metal refinery adds to the water, which is 56, we get 63. When this water reaches 63 degrees Celsius, it is no longer viable to be used at the metal refinery. And this is because at this point, you're running the risk of this pipe bursting when the polluted water changes state after it comes out of the metal refinery. It will turn into steam and it will break your pipes. So that's pretty much the only thing that you have to be conscious of when you have a setup like this. And as I said, the less that you run the metal refinery in this configuration, the longer it's going to survive. So make sure you ration your water usage if you're setting up the metal refinery for the first time in this configuration, because it's not going to last forever. However, this is an excellent way for you to get your initial batches of steel in order to create something like the aqua tuner, which is then going to help propel you into creating something like an industrial brick. And that's where the metal refinery will really shine. But for now, enjoy the steel while you have it, and enjoy the hot pool of water that you're going to create. There's definitely things that you can use it for, such as pincher pepper plants, so don't be afraid of having that hot polluted water around. The second method for running the metal refinery borrows heavily from the first method. This is a little bit more advanced because we're using a little bit of automation. However, the main difference is instead of having the metal refinery in a random swamp biome with random room temperature polluted water, we're putting it directly inside of a cold biome. This biome is naturally very cold, and you don't have to apply any active cooling that is costing you power. You're going to be getting natural cooling to the polluted water that is coming out of the metal refinery just from having it inside the biome itself. Now, in your case, you might not already have this polluted water here because naturally in a cold biome, everything's going to be frozen. So I have a bottle drainer here that inputs the polluted water directly into the metal refinery as a way to get your coolant flowing. Once it goes through the metal refinery for the first time, it heads up into the pipe, into a liquid storage tank, and then back down into radiant liquid pipes where it gets chilled by the ambient temperatures, where it then gets deposited into its new pool of liquid. Because we're using radiant liquid piping here, we are using refined metals, which you might have to get via the rock crusher. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of refined metal. This is going to depend on how long you want to make your run, which is also going to determine how much cooling you're going to be applying to your liquid that is coming out of the metal refinery. The real cooling obviously happens once it's in the radiant liquid pipes, where it goes from 34 degrees Celsius to 24 degrees Celsius, and then to just over 20 degrees Celsius before it comes out of the liquid vent. Just before it gets drained back into the pool, I have a liquid shutoff connected to a liquid pipe thermosensor via simple automation, and this is going to make sure that the liquid is cooled sufficiently before it gets dropped back into the pool, and thus being able to run the metal refinery for a lot longer than you normally would if you were inside of a swamp biome. You're also going to get the added benefit of the ice eventually melting in this area as you start to heat it up. Remember that if you mine out ice or snow, you're only going to get half that mass that you can use elsewhere in your base. But if it melts naturally, you're going to get the full mass of whatever ice and snow that is being melted. So in this case, this packet of snow is 9.9 kilograms, and you're going to get 9.9 kilograms of water once this melts. Depending on the size of your cold biome, you're going to be able to run this configuration for a lot longer than you normally would if you were back inside the swamp biome. This method is also highly customizable. For example, if you start to melt out this area of your ice because you've been running your metal refiner for a long time, all you would have to do is simply start digging this way or in any other direction inside of this ice biome and reroute your liquid pipes so it goes through the cold area instead of going through the already melted area. And it's as easy as that to unlock more cooling potential for your metal refinery coolant so you can continue to run it longer without the liquids overheating. So again, here are the overlays. It's very simple. And once again, the liquid reservoir is completely optional here. I like to use it as a buffer, but you could argue that it's not necessary. It's just something that I like to do for my playthroughs. Now, unlike the swamp biome, the polluted water in this reservoir is going to be a lot colder because it's also being cooled by the ambient temperatures. And you can also amplify this if you continue digging down in your ice biome into other parts of it. So for example, you don't have to have your liquid stored right here underneath the metal refinery, you could have it stored in here, where it's also very cold. Or you could progressively keep moving the liquid pump into colder areas of your ice biome if this starts to get too hot. So there are a lot of options available for you here if this is how you want to run your metal refinery. I would argue that this simple method can take you well into the mid-game if you don't prioritize building an industrial brick. One tip that you absolutely have to follow though is to build the metal refinery on top of mesh tiles. This is because as the tiles of ice and snow melt above it, they're going to accumulate on top of the metal refinery tiles and eventually cause it to flood. So make sure that everything is built on top of mesh tiles so that the melting snow and ice can just fall underneath. And I also advise you use a liquid lock because this will allow you to keep this biome a lot colder for a lot longer. Just be aware that you can't use something like water because the water is going to freeze and break your liquid lock. Polluted water has a freezing temperature of negative 20.6 degrees Celsius, but if the biome is cold enough, you're going to need to use something that can withstand the colder temperatures, such as crude oil or ethanol. Just be sure that you're using the correct liquid so you don't break your liquid lock. Also, keep in mind that just a single liquid lock will not completely stop the heat transfer or cold transfer from happening altogether. So if you want to completely seal it off and stop the transfer from happening altogether, you're going to want to use a double liquid lock method like I have over here. You don't need to use visco gel or supercoolant for this. You can use any two liquids that is going to withstand the temperatures of your cold biome. Typically, this is going to be something like crude oil and petroleum. And then once you vacuum out the space in the middle, there's no more heat transfer that can occur because the visco gel and the supercoolant in this scenario is unable to heat the atmosphere in the middle, so there's no heat transfer happening from one side to the other. The end goal for your metal refinery should be to have it inside of a self-contained room where you're going to be able to recapture the heat that is produced by the metal refinery and turn it back into power using the steam turbine. So in this case, I have the metal refineries inside an industrial brick, and this industrial brick is actively cooled via steam turbine and aqua tuner combo units. And you can find a video on that on my channel if you would like to learn more about those. In this case, we're no longer using polluted water or any sort of regular water for our metal refinery. We're actually using crude oil, and this crude oil is very hot coming out of the metal refinery at around 275 degrees Celsius. Once this crude oil leaves the metal refinery, it goes inside of a steam room. And this steam room is originally filled with water, but the heat produced in this room eventually turns it into steam, which is then deleted by the steam turbines. In this configuration, I have the crude oil cycling around inside of the steam room in an enclosed loop until it reaches my desired temperature when I'm allowing it to go back into the metal refinery. And of course, I'm controlling this using a liquid pipe thermal sensor. This liquid pipe thermal sensor sends a green signal if the temperature is above 150 degrees Celsius. Because it's connected directly to the liquid shutoff, it means that any crude oil in here that is above that temperature continues to cycle, which produces more steam, and only when the liquid pipe thermal sensor sends a red signal, that's when the crude oil is allowed to return to the metal refinery. This is a very simple piping setup that you can modify that allows you to recapture the heat that is produced and turn it into power. And this is ultimately your end goal for the metal refinery and your steel production. These metal refineries will continue to run all day and night in your colony, never overheat, and be able to produce power for you as well. The added benefit of a setup like this is that the steel that comes out of these metal refineries is going to be naturally cooled as it makes its way out of this industrial brick. Since the industrial brick is naturally cold, any metals that is produced that lands on the metal tiles, which is also being actively cooled, is going to naturally cool very quickly. Not only that, but the conveyor rail system that picks up the steel is going to help cool it as well as it travels along the path. You can see that by the time the steel makes its way out of the metal refinery, and out of the industrial brick, it drops at 12.6 degrees Celsius, which is more than enough to use anywhere within your base without causing things to become overheated. This is a lot better than the steel that would otherwise be produced inside of the swamp biome, which is 36 degrees Celsius, and even the steel that is produced inside the cold biome, which is 37 degrees Celsius. It really all depends on the ambient temperature and what cooling you already have available. Now obviously, this takes a lot of effort to build, and you're going to need plenty of steel in order to get this setup working. This is because everything inside of the steam room has to be made out of steel to withstand the temperatures of the steam. That includes the aqua tuner, the conveyor loader, the auto sweeper, and even the conveyor shutoff. So setting up something like this definitely requires you to explore other options, such as the swamp biome option or the cold biome option, in order to get your steel production up and running. From here, you can transfer into much bigger and better things, when you have enough material to build your industrial brick. So that's the basics of setting up your metal refinery. Now let's talk about some of the more interesting aspects of the metal refinery itself. For starters, let's compare the metal refinery to the rock crusher so we can see some of the differences regarding the materials that we can produce from both of them. The metal refinery and the rock crusher can both turn regular copper ore and gold amalgam into refined copper and refined gold. But there's going to be an important distinction that you want to make between the two. The rock crusher, for instance, will turn copper ore into copper at a 2-to-1 ratio. This means that every 100 kilograms of copper ore is only getting turned into 50 kilograms of copper. The rest of it gets turned into 50 kilograms of sand. This is the same for gold amalgam. 100 kilograms of gold amalgam gets turned into 50 kilograms of gold and 50 kilograms of sand. Just for the record, eggshell to lime is a 1-to-1 ratio, 5 kilograms to 5 kilograms. Fossil, on the other hand, when producing lime, is 100 kilograms of fossil getting turned into 5 kilograms of lime and 95 kilograms of sedimentary rock. So also keep these stats in mind when you're trying to produce lime, because the metal refinery is not going to be able to produce it for you. You have to produce it inside of the rock crusher. On the other hand, the metal refinery will turn copper ore into copper at a 1-to-1 ratio, 100 kilograms to 100 kilograms. And this is the same for gold amalgam and for steel once you add up all the weights of the ingredients used. 70 kilograms of iron, 20 kilograms of refined carbon, and 10 kilograms of lime turn into 100 kilograms of steel. One excellent alternative for producing refined iron is by ranching smooth hatches. Smooth hatches take some effort to get, but they're well worth the effort. A smooth hatch ranch is not only going to give you plenty of eggshells for lime, plenty of meat for barbecue, but it will also turn unrefined metals into refined metals while retaining 75% of the original mass of the metals, which is much better than the rock crusher's 50%. So 100 kilograms of any ore is going to produce 75 kilograms of refined metals. This is a lot better ratio than the rock crusher. It requires absolutely no power, and you're going to get lime production out of it, as well as meat for barbecue production. As for the refined carbon, there's only one realistic way you're going to be able to produce this early on, and that's going to be the kilns, which is another good reason to have a hatch ranch set up early on, and to begin transforming that hatch ranch into a smooth hatch ranch. In fact, you can have both running simultaneously, and not only is it going to give you plenty of coal for your steel production, but it's also going to give you plenty of lime, and with smooth hatches, plenty of refined iron as well. The final thing that I want to touch on is the increases of temperature of the coolants that you're going to be using for your metal refinery. The coolant temperature increases heavily depend on what type of metal you're trying to produce and what type of liquid that you're using as your coolant. Now, I highly recommend looking up this for yourself on the wiki, because they have an extensive table which shows you every single combination of ore being produced and what the coolant temperature increases if you're using water, crude oil, petroleum, or supercoolant. The numbers are almost impossible to remember offhand, but I will give you a tip for this as well, and that is basically just try whatever coolant that you have available and look at what the temperature increase is, and then compare that to the evaporation temperature so you can set a target that you don't go over and cause your piping to break. Just as a quick TLDR of the wiki, we've already seen that producing steel using polluted water causes a coolant temperature increase of 56 degrees. If you're using crude oil, it causes a coolant temperature increase of 138 degrees. But with petroleum, it's 133, and with supercoolant, it's only 28. So the differences are quite drastic depending on what type of coolant you're using, and like I said, these are also going to vary depending on what type of metals you're trying to produce. So in my opinion, the easiest way to deal with this is just to play around and make sure that you don't go over the evaporation limits of your coolants. So that was it for metal refineries and oxygen not included. I really do hope that you were able to learn something from this guide, and if you did, let me know down in the comments below. And as always, let me know if you have any suggestions for future videos that you would like to see on the channel. I really appreciate everyone's comments and feedback, and I have a lot of fun making videos for you guys that you request, so don't be afraid to leave them down below. If you made it this far, be sure to leave a rating on this video, as this helps me out immensely in the algorithm. And if you're not subscribed, please do so you can see more videos like this in the future on your YouTube homepage. And thank you to everyone who's been watching my videos and being so supportive over the last couple months. I can never end a video without thanking you guys for your support and keeping me motivated to continue making more videos. I just did my first live stream on the weekend, and I plan to do a lot more in the future. That was a lot of fun as well, and I can't wait to share my experiences more often on live streams. So until next time, I'm Ethan, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.